Hello and welcome to the Leading Communities podcast, brought to you by Aspire for You CIC and produced by That's All Media CIC. I'm Kit Chawande and I'll be your host.
Welcome to Leading Communities. I'm Kit Chawande, Director of Aspire for You. We are joined by Monique Charles, Dr. Monique Charles. We can't forget that. What do we even call that? What do you call it? Or your what? Is there a title for that? Title, yeah. Okay. Prefix, that's the baby.
Oh, okay,
yeah. For anyone who is joining us for the first time, Leading Communities is all about getting young people, not just young people, communities and leaders to start caring, keep caring or care more. And we're here to share the best knowledge around us from a range of communities. So Dr. Monique Charles, would you kindly introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Monique Charles, and where do I start? So I think let's start with the title, I suppose, doctor. So that means I have a PhD. I did a PhD in sociology at Warwick University, and my PhD was actually in grime. So I suppose now it's not necessarily as considered as revolutionary, but when I first came out with it when I first started it in 2010, it was something that people didn't even imagine that you could actually do. So I'm really happy that I have done it. And it's helped to kind of show the value of, the music and the culture and the people that are connected to that music, to show that it very much has a space and a place in British history and obviously broader than Britain itself. Do you want me to elaborate?
Excellent. And yeah, but I mean, tell us the backstory. So the fact that you were able to actually make grime work in an academic arena, for me, is already telling me that there are cells in your brain that are maybe on the superior spectrum. So can you tell us a bit of the backstory and how did you get here?
Okay, so if we start, I'm that sort of person that likes to do thought experiments, right? So I like to take random things and think about them and see if there are connections. I've always been like that. So if we start with, for example, the example that I usually give is when I was about 8, back then it was in year 4, I think it's the equivalent of year 4 now. That's when we used to learn fractions. I think people learn them a bit earlier now, so you might learn them in year 2, but back then it was in year 4. And when I was learning about maths, I was learning about fractions, I was using fractions and percentages to try and understand the social world in terms of black, white, boys and girls. I mean, it's much more complex than that. But I'm a natural sociologist, so I've always been trying to understand how the world works. Anyway, so that was just an 8, just to kind of show that fractions and percentages, once I'd learned that, I was trying to make sense of the world. Okay, let's fast forward. I've always been interested in singing, so I was dabbling in singing for a bit, but I knew I was going to go to university. I was told I was going, it just felt natural, so I went to university. I was always interested in race. I was also interested in the brain, much like you, or what makes people tick. So maybe not in a necessarily a completely scientific sense, but definitely what makes people tick, what motivates people, the social world. So I did my first degree, and that was in psychology and race and cultural studies. I kind of put music and singing on the burner because I thought I had to do something really academic or, that kind of thing. So the singing
was which university was that? Sorry.
That was at Middlesex. University. And so yeah, that was my first degree. And then once I'd finished that, I started with the singing again. That calling, that music thing was kind of pulling me back. And so
what kind of music were you into?
So I was into all sorts, but the sort of things that I sung lots of different types of things. I think my home is like soul, R&B, jazz, but I have been in church choirs, so like singing in Latin and French and Spanish, all that sort of stuff as well. I've been in different community choirs, singing gospel, singing Christmas carols, all sorts of things. So yeah, that was the kind of singing stuff I was doing. And then I had the study bug because I'm interested in the social world, trying to make sense of like everything. The study bug was still there. So then I went to go and do a master's, and I was interested in race still. And at this time I was like, yeah, psychology I'm interested in. It's cool what makes people tick, but I really want to understand this social world, this race stuff. So I did a master's in race and ethnic relations. That was at Birkbeck, which is part of University of London. And although it is called race and ethnic relations, at that particular master's, which is a political science master's, looked at gender as well. It looked at class. Sexuality wasn't really on the syllabus at that time in the way that like you see it being spoken about now. So it was mainly race, class and gender, and it looked at it in terms of policy, hence the political science side of things, and also it looked at it in terms of culture, which is really why I was there. I enjoyed the political, like the policy side. It was really useful to help me make sense of the social world, but I was there about the culture, knowing that my dissertation was going to have an element of race or blackness and music. So it was when I was doing my master's thesis, which is a bit like the dissertation, let's just call it that. I was looking at hip hop. You know, I suppose the classic, when you think of black music, you think of hip hop. So I was looking at hip hop, and then I was looking at how the most successful artists conformed most strongly to racial stereotypes. So for women, some of the stereotypes of black women, if we say in the American South, you know, during slavery or enslavement and colonial periods and sharecropping, you know, you had different stereotypes, but the Jezebel, the kind of loose woman, was one of the kind of tropes that were used. And this you can kind of see. So
just to define trope for me, and spend 2 or 3 extra seconds maybe elaborating on some of the microculture of that American South and how that had an impact on American culture.
Okay, tropes. All right. Maybe I should remix that and just say stereotypes, because that might feel a bit more, maybe a bit more
accessible.
Yeah, it's a bit more accessible. So, stereotypes are kind of crude images, and by crude I mean I don't want to use the word stereotype. So then they're not true things about a particular group of people. I mean, even if there are elements of truth in it, they are completely exaggerated and almost made completely fictitious. Yeah. So if we're thinking about the Jezebel stereotype, that may be a woman that's considered to be a bit loose, quite hypersexual, you know, and you know that's where she gets most of her worth from. So when I was looking at the most successful crossover hip hop artists, the female artists at that particular period, they conform most strongly to this stereotype of being sexually available, that sort of thing. So
are we talking Blue Cantrell? Are we talking Little Kim?
We're talking about Little Kim when I was analysing her in particular. I was kind of exploring that, and then the same thing with the men. So at that time, the artist I looked at in a lot of depth was 50 Cent, because he was quite a big deal at that time, and he conformed most strongly to the aggressive, hyper masculine stereotype of, you know, how men were portrayed as dangerous and would, you know, take your wives and all that sort of stuff that used to, I suppose that was propagated during slavery and, you know, in the American South and sharecropping, that sort of thing. But what I was also doing is I was looking at how the music industry kind of capitalized on those racist ideas or those racist stereotypes. And through doing that, these artists obviously buying into the stereotypes, even though, I mean, they have a certain degree of choice, but they're up against an industry, how that representation helped to kind of continue the process of racism for black people in everyday life. So for example, when I went on holiday to Greece, people didn't know me. They automatically assumed I was American, because the idea of black Britishness in the early 2000s or the early noughties, it was still an anomaly for, you know, many people in the world. So they'd be like, yo, what's happening? They would automatically assume that would be home for me because of the hip hop and things that they've seen. So I was looking at that, and I was also looking at the political economy of the music industry, which is much different now, because back then, you know, we still had CDs, cassettes were kind of going. So I don't know if the young people are familiar with cassettes, but looking at the idea of, you know, artists would get like $1 million record deal, and people would think, whoa, they've made it. But actually that $1 million that you're getting, right, tax is going to come out of that, and then you've got to pay for everything out of that. And so then any money you make, I can't hear you.
And it's a forward charge. Sorry,
Yeah,
no, I was saying, and it's a forward charge. So
That's-
that million is between until the next album. So
yeah,
if
exactly.
your next thing doesn't come out for 2-3 years, you know what I mean?
Exactly, yeah. So and so you make money based on how many CDs or units you sell, CDs or cassettes. But for every CD you sell, you know, if you've paid songwriters or, you know, other people have got licenses and distribution and all these things attached to it. So out of a £10, let's say £10 CD, you may get 15 cents or so, 15 pence. So so you have to sell so much. And I was comparing that to the sharecropping which happened in the American South once slavery had ended or was coming to an end. And what sharecropping was in the American South was, you may have heard about, you know, African Americans picking cotton. And so they would live on a plantation and they would pick cotton. They would obviously be doing all of the labor, picking the cotton and everything else. But the industry, or, you know, the person who owned the land would be the one that would make most of the profit, and they would get the 15 pence or 15 cents out of the £10 worth.
So almost you own the land, I work on the land, I get a share of the crop, but it's not like it's an even split either. It's almost remotely, like, you know exactly. What I mean? I'm still an employee.
Yeah. So that was kind of what I was doing in the masters. But anyway, that's a long story short. When I was doing this was in the mid noughties, so 2005 to 2007, I was doing this. And when I was looking up stuff about hip hop, there were loads of books about it. You know, Trisha Rose is a famous academic. You know, Nelson George. There's loads of them. That have all of this scholarly work. And around this time also, we had politicians in the UK condemning all this gangster rap because they didn't know if it was called grime or esky or whatever at the time, all this gangster rap and stuff. And I thought, this couldn't happen in the US. Not that we need to be the US, but I thought this couldn't happen in the US because there's a body of academic scholarly work where academics can come out and show, okay, hip hop has done this, it's generated this GDP, or it's representing this culture, and it can kind of break it down and help a dialogue and you know, and explain things and break things down. And that wasn't happening here. And so when I finished the masters, I knew I wanted to do a PhD, and I knew that I had to do it on Black British music, and grime was happening at the time. I knew that people didn't necessarily understand the sociological value of it. And because of that, I thought, if I get in and I interview people will tell the truth. Well, I'm hoping that they'll tell the truth, because they're not going to be thinking, oh yeah, when I did this back then, kind of inflate their story or inflate their role in it or anything like that. I can try and capture the raw truth, try and make sense of it and show, look, there is value here. Because for politicians to be condemning kids, yeah, they've created a massive scene to even get on the radar of politicians. And there was something happening there, and I wanted to do my part to capture that. So I suppose it kind of connects to your caring, you know, your three caring aspects of caring. So it was really caring. Yeah. I thought, no, I can't have this. I need to get involved. Something's happening here, and it needs to get into the academy so that, you know, at some point it can be on the curriculum and taught just like any other genre of music.
Excellent. And I think that's what's really interesting, because so what I believe you've described is really that you took a strategic intervention into getting people to start caring. You could see a force wind come in that could be corrupted. And you then thought, oh, wait a minute, if I can interject this with a legitimacy, which is what academia brings, I can disrupt those with the ill intentions and possibly actually pave a way for people to achieve a realization that, oh, wait a minute, within this genre is a magic, within this genre is a human representation. Like, you know what I mean? There's people trying to get somewhere here. Let's not just demonize them. Okay. So you saw that. You appeared to be a person that understands that it's not always about quick wins. So you then started to do this strategic work behind the scenes. So thinking as maybe you didn't see yourself as a leader there, but I can definitely see that those are leadership qualities. How did the conversation go when you go, I'm going to study grime, A, and B, how did that get funded?
Okay, so I'm going to study grime funding. When I was doing it, they were not in the same sentence. Okay, they were not in the same sentence, but I knew I had to do it. So I did my PhD part-time. I self-funded, so I was working and I was doing the PhD. So I had to, you know, make use of my, as one of my friends says, make use of my 9 to 5 to fund my 5 to 9. Yeah. So that's how I used my time. I had to be very economical with my time. When I was telling people I was doing a PhD, because I don't know how many of the listeners will know the difference between universities. So Warwick University is Russell Group. So it's classified as, you know, being up there with Oxford and Cambridge. The Russell Group collective, you know, you may have heard of the Ivy League in the US, Harvard, you know, it's kind of like an elite set of universities. So Russell Group is that, and Warwick is in there. So for those people who knew that I was going to Russell Group, they'd be like, oh, wow, you're going, you know, well done. What are you going to study? Grime. What, you're going to this big university to study grime? And so after a while, and my journey has been quite interesting, because I find I tell people less and less, because I realize that people don't necessarily understand. Like me talking to you now, you can recognize that this is a leadership thing that I've stepped into. I was aware of this because I looked at historically what happened. You know, if we look at how blues started, we look at people involved in blues now, we look at how jazz started, we look at the majority of people involved in jazz now, and we look at the process of capitalism and colonization of Black musical forms. If nobody starts to get in there to change that cycle is going to happen. It's still happening, even though I'm in the mix now, I'm in the tumble dryer, it's still happening, but it makes it more difficult because I'm there, right? That's a whole nother conversation. But so it's very well, what was I initially going to say? So so people don't always necessarily grasp what I'm doing, and then if they do grasp what I'm doing, because I've told them some stuff, people run with it because they want to be the leader, because they want the quick wins. So for example, 2 of the people I interviewed in my PhD, so with my PhD I went to go and do research. It involved my particular research involved interviewing people. It involved going to grime raves, some garage raves, concerts for observation. That's a research method technique. And also analyzing lyrics and sonics of different songs, right? So those are the 3 things that I did. It's a shame, even though I'm in my studio of my library, I haven't got my PhD with me. That's actually at home. I should have brought it so I could show you what that looks like. But some of the people I interviewed were journalists. They had been writing about and documenting, writing about grime for the best part of a decade by that point. It's only when I started to say, in layman's terms, I didn't say there's no scholarly work, I was saying there are no books really on the subject. After the interaction with me, books have come out, which is great, but the narrative and the detail of research isn't necessarily there, which can kind of shift the narrative. And also, there's many dynamics to this, but you know, credit hasn't been given necessarily for, you know, inspiring ideas. For example, I gave a talk, and one of the examples I always give is Stormzy should be on the curriculum just as much as Mozart. Yeah, so I've been using this example in almost every talk.
Didn't that make it into the Metro?
It made it into the Metro. It made it onto Good Morning Britain. But where I gave the talk, that university was working in collaboration with a particular charity who ran with the idea, who misunderstood the idea, but the idea got sensationalized and put national, and there's no credit as to where it originally came from, which is me. So I've got videos on my YouTube channel. You can see me talking about this, years predating that, for example. So
whilst you're here, give us the dates. Like, when did you do your YouTube pieces of the original thought? Okay. And when did the Metro stuff blow?
So the Metro stuff was, was last year. Bear with me. It was the same time that this book came out that I've written in. So it was last year. It was last year May. It was around last year May. All this stuff blew up with that particular charity and everything else. I've got a video of me talking about that in October 2016 on YouTube. I also have a video of me talking about it a month before, where I was talking in, at the University of Gloucester. That's also on my YouTube channel. So April 2019, I was talking about it, but they actually took it from a recording. They recorded the talk, obviously, and they took it from when I spoke about it in December 2018. So it's something I always use to try and help people understand that Mozart has died, obviously. He died hundreds of years ago, but the nature of scholarly work and institutionalizing knowledge, not that it needs the legitimacy, but institutionalizing the knowledge enables it to become part of canon and can outlive us. So if everyone died tomorrow, you know, and aliens came down and looked, they would still have a source that they could access. So that's the reason why I use the example. And they were kind of trying to say, Mozart shouldn't be in, Stormzy needs to be in, but both can be in, because it's all music. But yeah, so it's been an interesting journey, because I'm long game. And then when I do share with people, they're not thinking necessarily long game, they're trying to grab and run. And so it's a very, very interesting and challenging journey. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. So that's really interesting. And then just at the academia point, when you're saying that you want to study grime, how was that taken? And I'm guessing this is the School of Sociology or something like that, or School of Social Sciences.
Yeah, sociology. I'm fortunate that I had the supervisors that I've had. So the supervisors are the people that help guide you through the PhD process. Luckily, I had supervisors that were enthusiastic about my idea. So if anybody ever wanted to go off and do a PhD, you need to find supervisors that are enthusiastic about your idea. And so that was good in academic terms, but relaying it to people outside of, I suppose, outside of my supervisors or outside of people that were doing research, maybe on music or maybe on race, they just couldn't see, like, that's like some low ghetto, like, what are you doing? How they couldn't make the connection.
Why are you wasting your education? Why are you wasting this? Yeah.
So there was that. And then, I mean, I even had somebody that assumed that I must fancy somebody in the scene. And I thought to myself, I mean, I didn't, and I just thought to myself, why would I dedicate 6 years of my life to studying something because I fancy somebody in the scene? That's not even logical to me, you know. And then because I had a spiritual element in it, I mean, I very rarely spoke about the spiritual element involved in the whole thing as well. So it's been a very interesting journey, let's just put it that way, of thought experiments and ideas that, you know, one is all the way possibly to the left and one is all the way to the right. And I can begin to make the connections, but I realize now that not everyone can. And then if they do grasp something, they might want to just capitalize on that, which is not for the greater good and the caring, which is what I'm about. So it's very interesting.
And I think that's for me, that's absolutely, like, the first 20 minutes ish, you just come in with a load of big hitters there. And I think, like, the biggest takeaways, and to start with the jokey one, which is there must be something wrong with people if people think that fangirl moments is what's going to make someone do a PhD. So people are, like, sadly really, really misinformed. But also the ability to join the dots is a massive part of things. And sometimes you're not wrong, you're just too early. And when you are too early, there's an element of logging and demonstrating and sharing your work, because if you don't, there are people out there that need the attention, and they may accidentally get credited for actually your original thought. So there's a role there for all of us to document our thoughts more. And it's not even necessarily a selfish act or an attention-seeking act. It's almost a historic responsibility for those that are yet to come.
So that was one of the things that I did. Sorry.
No, go for it.
No, I was going to say that was one of the things that I have done, is I've tried at least to make myself visible, mainly on Instagram, but try to make myself visible, try to make my work visible. But again, because people don't understand the vulnerable position someone ahead of their time can be, it's seen as, oh, she's got her degree, she's bougie now, she thinks she, you know, it's kind of seen as me bragging or boasting, but it's actually a protective thing. So I mean, yeah, there's lots involved in that. But anyway.
Yeah, and I'm really interested in that actually, because I think that's a huge part of leadership. I think the fact that you've actually almost aligned what so in the businesses that I run and with the team, I always say to them that we've only got two types of behaviors: attacking behaviors and defensive behaviors. So what I like about my team is we've got people that are all about operations and are things in the right folders and are things scheduled right. And I always say that that's good, but those are the things that the customer will never see, and your potential audiences, your fans, your relationship, it's irrespective. Then there's the attacking stuff, which is what visibility is about. And part of the reason why people like order is because of the anxiety that chaos invokes, etc. But what's also interesting is that if you actually also want certain things, you've got to avoid defensive behaviors, and not putting your voice out there is a defensive behavior because you're overthinking what people might say, what if you misunderstood. And as a quick side note, the best thing I've seen, probably, I've been of this brain or this mindset since I was about 14. And the best news that I was trying to share with people is if people like Nike and H&M and etc. can get it wrong, that means we all have a chance. And that also then also means that even if you do get it wrong, the judgment is temporary because it's only a matter of time before somebody else screws up more than you. But also why have the audacity to try and live a perfect life when we are fractal beings in a chaotic universe? So the audacity is maybe a strong word, but like, what is wrong with getting things wrong? Like, what's the point of existence if you can't feel your way towards the right answer? So I always try and encourage that. But talking about that visibility and digging deeper, what's the hardest part about being seen?
The hardest part about being seen for me is sometimes it can be the expectation that people put on you. So the judgment, I don't think really bothers me that much because I know what I know. I'm doing what I'm doing.
You can live with it. You can manage it.
Yeah, I can manage that. But it's the I don't know. I don't know if I'm using judgment and expectation in different ways. But I think the hardest part about being seen, I think, is okay. Is this going to be a video or is this going to be or just an audio?
Either that you want.
Okay.
But mostly video and audio. Yeah.
Okay.
There'll be
right.
a Spotify, and then we'll have a YouTube.
Okay, great. So for those who are listening on audio, then I am a dark-skinned Black woman. You can find me on on the internet if you want to Google and see. But I'm a dark-skinned Black woman.
Throw your plug in now, and then we'll do it later. So what's your socials whilst we're at it?
Okay, so my website is drmoniquecharles.com. And my Instagram, that's the one I mainly use, is Neek81. So that's N for November, EAKE81. So you can find me on Instagram there. Okay. But so I'm a dark-skinned Black woman, and if we think about terms in UK, if we think about that, we filter that through obviously race, class, gender. I'm a woman. I am, most Black people, for the most part, in the, I suppose, if we start history, I mean, it starts from before Windrush, but if we look at when we kind of entered in mass numbers, we were kind of put in the lower socioeconomic group. If we think about academia, people will still think, okay, it's a wealthy, it's, white, it's older and all this sort of stuff. I mean, I don't necessarily look like an academic. Well, people don't necessarily think that. So, door knocker earrings, whatever. And so the hardest thing about being seen is people can, because I look like this, it might be like, oh, well, you're not one of us anymore. So it's the interaction of the treatment that you may get because you're not one of us anymore. Or the assumption that I'm maybe rolling in it and living life large. Like, yes, academia is associated with privilege, but because you're in it doesn't mean that it's all rosy. or the expectation to always give your knowledge for free or to give your time for free. I mean, I get emails on a regular basis, and people want things, and what they want takes time to prepare, and and there's just no kind of acknowledgement. And I do want to help, but it's just not possible. It's just not possible. And I want to do things strategically, as you've realized now by the way I've gone about things. So it's just sometimes the interaction, like the devaluing of what I'm doing, seeing the value being placed on other things, which is fine. But when I know that the root actually was from here, but there's no respect here, but you value this, and so it's hard. It's being seen and not getting the credit, I think, is the most challenging thing for me. Being the eldest of however many and all that sort of stuff. I'm used to kind of being the leader, but yeah, I think the not getting the credit is the hardest.
And that's really interesting, because I think, you're describing what, in sort of venture capital land or whatever is known as like the mental game. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. You're describing very much that this is there's a cerebral quality, there's a thinking quality to what we do as leaders. What would you say is the best part of being seen?
The best part of being seen is, walking into a classroom, and then I stand up at the front, and then I open my mouth and introduce myself, and then students are like, whoa. Or, I mean, some are like, oh gosh, who's this? But some are like, whoa, like this person, I feel like I can relate to this person. Or when I get emails from people like, I read your work, it really helped me with my, my dissertation. Thank you for doing this. Like they can, for the ones that can see the value of what I'm doing, or it's made me think about music in different ways. It's made me really like value my culture in a way. It's made me see my contribution, to history. Those moments of realization, for me, they're just amazing. And I like to be seen for the work I've done, and I suppose in relation to what I'm trying to do, I guess.
Awesome. Okay. So part of your description is as a social psychologist, cultural sociologist, forgive me, and also a therapist. So tell us about that evolution, because that's almost also a niche in itself.
Yeah. So I'm a sound therapist. Again, I suppose it kind of culminates everything together. So I am interested in what makes people tick, hence the psychology and all that studying before. Although I didn't take it to, was it the clinical or the BPS approved accredited thing. So there's that. Obviously, I enjoy singing. I enjoy music. My work is about bringing value to the culture, to the music, all of that sort of stuff. But I also like the idea of music helping people, or sound helping people. So because spirituality was an aspect I kind of brought into the PhD, not that you can necessarily completely conflate wellness, spirituality, emotion. I wanted to find ways that I could use music or sound or something to kind of help people. So then I started to train in sound therapy. So I specialize in tuning forks, and using tuning forks to kind of what they do, basically, the sound wave enters your ears, gets into the brain, and the brain releases chemicals and helps to flush your central nervous system and release tension and stress from your body, be it physical, emotional. So I do that sort of work as well. And I like that because I don't necessarily take on the emotions of a person in distress. The sound does it, and it does it much more deeply than I feel like I could ever do for that person. So I send my well wishes and all my kind of intuitive gifting with the sound, but it's the sound that does the work.
And that's really, really interesting, because again, that's you adding a string to your bow, and it's not just, like almost like it's not a one-trick pony situation. It's I call it having an and for a lot of the young people I work with, I encourage them to have an and. So I always say, if you are a grime artist, why can't you be a grime artist and have a violinist or a saxophonist do stuff with you? Why can't you be a grime artist and maybe do things with the elderly? It's not just about kind of that one play. So, and what's really interesting about your work is then there's aspects of well-being and then obviously cultural inquisitions. When you sort of bring those two worlds together, do you have to, as that person that's fundamentally leading yourself, and it'll be interesting if you have any tribes or any followers, how do you code switch?
I don't even know if I code switch really, because I see myself as a complex person and I just try to be myself as much as possible. So, you know, when I'm teaching with my earrings in, or if I've got a head tie on that day, it's that day. You know, I don't necessarily start to talk like this to my students because I'm in an academic, you know, I may change my voice when I'm doing meditation work, you know, with people to get them relaxed, ready to do the sound therapy, but I'm always trying my best to be my authentic self. And I suppose this is a really nice conversation in the sense of, you know, the well-being, the sound therapy stuff is about care. The academic work I do is about care. And so for me, I don't look like an academic. I'm not going to try to look like what people imagine an academic to be. I'm trying to take up space so that if you look like me and you've read my work and you rate me, which I hope you do, then you feel like I can actually do this and I don't have to become a code switching, you know. And for me, it's a funny, tricky line, but I try my utmost to take up space as much, being myself as much as possible, because that in itself is a political act. And I suppose that connects me back to my political science. The political is personal, or the personal is political, all that sort of stuff. So my political science masters. So it's like everything, when I go through life, everything I go through, I kind of, it's almost like, what can I learn from this? What can I learn from this? It's almost like my brain is, to be honest, I'm always thinking about something. So it's almost like I'm always trying to compute, always trying to add, always trying to make sense of things. How can this help me make sense of the social world? And so me turning up like this is me trying to be my authentic self. And I'm aware that it's also political. So yeah. So I don't feel like I code switch. And I think I maybe can get away with it as well because of the nature of the things that I study. Whereas if I studied law, then the whole history of, you know, that as an academic discipline will kind of force me to conform. But I'm kind of helping to build a discipline that is not really a thing in the UK. You know, Black music as an academic discipline is not. So I got a bit of freedom with how I want to show up.
And that's actually, there are probably two learning points in there, which is there are some industries where the legacy is always probably infinitely bigger than the human. And even if the human tries to push back, the industry or the system is a little too archaic for anything to happen very quickly. And then I think also what's very interesting is though the beauty of having a niche means that within your niche, you get the permission. So you know the codes of academia, you know the good practices and the required practices to make sure that your work is authentic, valid, reliable, and has all the right rigor. So you know how things are done properly, but you've also then been able to take a niche that allows the cultural integrity, and you've almost gone, well, I'm going to make sure that you don't mess with my rigor, and you also don't mess with the culture that's kind of come before me. So that's the beauty of kind of having a niche. So then thinking about that and this history of standing out, this history of being distinct, being a thinker, being a reflective practitioner, which is how it sounds like you've been describing yourself.
Yeah, definitely.
What's the value and the power of writing books? And then I'm going to evolve that into, for the average person that's leading a social enterprise and such, like where should they be thinking about sort of books? What's the value of books for anyone who's like leading a movement, leading a business, leading an organization, especially the writing? So not just readership, but actually writing. So what's the value of writing a book for Dr. Monique Charles?
Okay, so the importance of writing a book, which I'm still working on, but the importance of writing a book or writing books is we live in a Western world. Western world prioritizes sight over sound anyway, right? So once something becomes written down, it becomes tangible in a way that sound, even though my area is sound isn't tangible in the same way. As long as you can kind of understand the language and are able to read, I can give you something and you can read it. If I'm trying to explain to you what grime sounds like, and if you don't know what it sounds like, the only thing I can do is give you, I suppose give you the sound, but technology may make it deteriorate over time. You know, there's lots of things around sound.
Yeah.
I mean, it's more difficult.
There's actually a really good point there, actually, and sorry to interject, because you've definitely got some things like pinging in my brain. That's a very interesting point, which is there's something about listing, or there's something about data that is a permanent record versus data that's a little bit more fluid, and it's and it's really interesting that with storytelling, if it's not recorded, you've always got that element of maybe Chinese whispers, and it can always lose its flavor or take a different spin. But the written word is a tiny bit more protected for the consistency of transfer of information. But
exactly. And it's that, for that very reason, is what, you know, obviously we live in the West. That is the very reason why, you know, Western thinkers, you know, could arrogantly say, you know, Africans didn't have a history, because they had obviously they've had an oral tradition and, you know, messaging, but because it wasn't written down, they discredited it. And I'm not necessarily agreeing with the discrediting of oral history and sound. I mean, that's my area. But there is something about, especially if we are living under this framework that prioritizes sight, that prioritizes these things and preserving knowledge, there is something to be said about doing that as well. Not only, but as well. So there's an importance in doing that as well. So there's that. But again, writing itself is not, I mean, it's important, but it's what you write that is important. Okay, because, and I don't really want to, I'm going to have to be careful how I say this, because I know that obviously you are probably aware yourself, being a leader, you have people waiting and watching and trying to grasp what they can, and I've already been stolen from. So what you write is really important, right? So how I will say this is I will tell you what I've done so far, right? So I was writing a PhD on grime. Now, there are different ways that you can go about this. You can write a descriptive piece that describes everything that happens, or you can write something that gives you an insight to understand. So you can describe something, or you can give somebody the tools through writing to help them to understand how things operate, how to make sense of things. Yeah. So you're giving them kind of like what the method is, or or what the theory is, so that people can unpack. And then all the descriptive stuff that anybody else writes, you will be able to measure it against the benchmark. Yeah. So if anybody's writing anything, it needs to be a benchmark thing. In academic terms, you will talk about concepts, we'll talk about theoretical frameworks, we'll talk about methodological approaches. So how do you approach that? So for example, I could write what example you gave earlier about, you know, stack them high, sell them cheap, and all this sort of stuff, right? So I could write about, oh yeah, I've got this business, stack them high, sell them cheap, whatever. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to make sure that I've got just what I need, just to sell, just in, you know, whenever I need it, whatever, right? So as a theory, if you think about, I think it was Japan after, you know, is it Pearl Harbor? My history on that thing is not great, right? They developed a technique. So I suppose a conceptual framework.
Yeah. It's called just in time. Just in time.
That's basically what I was getting to. So I can describe, oh yeah, this, that, and the other with my business, and I'm going to get things just when I need it, and, you know, drop shipping, or, you know, you can write all of that. But at the end of the day, the blueprint is just in time. Yeah. So when you're writing things, you have to write things that can accommodate all the descriptive stuff. Let me just leave it at that. I don't want to say any more than that. I know it might be a bit abstract.
Okay.
It might be a bit abstract.
Cool.
But I know that since I've started to talk to people about developing concepts and things, people are now trying to do that, which is fine, but it's not necessarily innate or natural to them. that it's just a new let me do something to kind of, so I
A new way.
I'll just leave it at
okay,
that.
that's a really interesting point, and yeah, no, that's fine, and perfectly respectable. So part of where that kind of question was leading to, and this might be probably our penultimate, if not final question. We were doing a documentary with a range of leaders and a range of thought leaders and even arguably influencers in the region. Around the challenges of Black History Month. So we were working with West Midlands Police on that commission piece. And in one of our interviews and collaborations with Dr. Martin Glynn, who's a very well-known lecturer, writer, author, and he's kind of taken perception and what he was saying, and this is credit to him, and the conversations that were being had was the value of books and writing with sort of communities, where communities maybe write their own, and such like that. What are your thoughts on organizations writing their own books? Because there's a whole world that says as well that your book is like a business card. It's just a longer form. So that means that if no one can meet you and understand who you are and what you do, the book can do a lot of that for you. So for organizations that maybe have been around 5, 6, 7 years, and it's very hard, it's complex for them to put everything they do on a poster. His thoughts and a lot of other people's thoughts are books are a complementary factor.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that. I think they're a complementary take. Ultimately, they need to connote or need to suggest the ethos of the company so that people get a feel for the company. It's got to have some descriptive stuff. It was founded here, this and all that sort of stuff. But what is that ethos? The same way you've given me the 3 care strands that you have, like there has to be an ethos. So if I never met you, if I picked up the book, then I would get a sense of that. So I think books are important. They really are important. I know people don't necessarily read them as much now, but you can get them on audiobook and all sorts of different formats, but you need to have that there, definitely.
And what would you say is a smart way for said organizations to integrate and work with academia to get their work better known, or to get their work sort of validated or ratified?
I think, there's a whole decolonize the curriculum movement happening at the moment. So there's that. I don't know. Lots of universities have outreach department. I think I'm now feeling like I'm kind of not in my lane. So this is just my kind of
human opinion.
Yeah, exactly. So I always like to make sure that when I feel like I'm out of my lane, I disclose that, because there's nothing worse than me be like, yes and this and and kind of speaking out of
and then 7 years later somebody's like, you told me.
Exactly. So when it comes to I do think universities, they have to change. They fundamentally have to change. How they are actually going to, I know there are lots of academics at the moment that are doing the work
Can I be cheeky and offer sort of a complimentary?
Give me.
Okay, cool. So there's an aspect, or there's an argument basically saying this is as similar to if you're trying to influence and work with policy, which is fundamentally people, social enterprises, small businesses, etc., should engage with universities and maybe even make themselves known to say, look, university, you've probably got to do some outreach projects. Our organization's probably interested in being part of any bids you write to go and find people. The other aspect is even just being like an advisory talk, inviting them to speak to communities, etc. There's one thing that I think is a particularly exciting to me, and I was kind of like, as we were speaking, and I've thought about this sort of in the past, that along the lines of that, getting and inviting academia, because again, I'm thinking about academics, not necessarily the institute, but the individual. I'm of the mind that, so I paid £6,000 to do my master's out of my own money. I was working part-time, etc. I'm now of the mind that this is going to be, I'm going to say the arrogant version, and then I'm going to say what I really think, like the rest of it. I'm of the mind that potentially people like you or I will be in a position where a parent is going to look at the university fee and say, actually, I'd rather pay Dr. Monique Charles, or I'd rather pay Kit £4,000 instead of the £6,000 for them to just take my kid on for a couple of years, and he just does stuff for them, because the network that they're going to build and the actual institute enterprises and the experiences that they're going to build is more or less what they'd get, like, you know what I mean, or probably even better than university, because university can't guarantee work, but they're taking money for the knowledge. So now that's the arrogant version when I put you and I in. If we replace you and I with, say, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, you know, Carlos Slim, who's meant to be one of the richest guys, Lakshmi Mittal, who are all, you know, some of the top 10, 20 richest people in the world. If we said, would you pay those people to take your kids on as their mentor and graduation? The answer is yes, because those guys can guarantee your kids will get at least 35K in one of their businesses or their partner businesses just straight off. So that's where I kind of think that there's an opportunity there with academia, where maybe communities need to start thinking about pooling money together and start to extract people like you downwards to say, look, can we just commission you to look after our work? Because fundamentally, that's what universities are doing. Universities are the pay booth, if you think about it. You're the talent, they've got the brand, they're the house, but you come out of the house, they've only got the brand, but your individualness is probably what, you know what I mean? I believe that if you want 40 grand a year, I believe there'll be a touch. It's radical.
No, the thing is, for me, that can work, right? As you were talking, because for me, I always do a big picture thing. So when you started to talk about Jeff Bezos and, you know, people with money that could fund it, then I thought, okay, so this can be a macro situation. My only concern about that is, one of the things that my dad said to me is, study what you enjoy. Just study what you like for what you like sake. Now, the way that academia's gone, the way that, you know, the way that just the world we live in has gone, everything is always connected back to money. Is there going to be a job at the end? Now, that model will guarantee the skills and everything else. But then where is the room possibly for innovation? Because for me, a PhD in grime is not going to guarantee me anything. You know, fair enough, out of it, I've developed some theories and stuff, so that's going to be, you know, working its way through institutions, nationally, internationally, all of that sort of stuff. So that's great. But it's not going to guarantee me anything. It's just that it's care, it's knowledge for knowledge's sake, if you want to call it that. So that is my only... It can definitely work, so I'm not against the idea. Do you know what I mean? But that's my concern for those people that think, oh, I like I don't know, flowers or I don't know, just something random, you know.
Yeah, but I think that's where I'm coming from, which is once we start to understand the value, which is, again, it's a relative thing. There's always going to be room for academia and even university, irrespective of academia. So there's always going to be room for universities for specialisms. But like you say, that's a perfect one. Flowers, say equine studies, arguably football studies. Paying $9 grand to a university where the actual work is so what's the word? It's practitioner led, and it's very. What's the word that we use for having a trade? What's the word?
Apprenticeship.
Yeah, but it's very hands-on
and
vocational. Thank you.
Yeah.
So for anything that's vocational, it is way more pragmatic to just put them get taught by someone who's functionally doing it. And entrepreneurship is vocational. It isn't academic. It's very vocational. Like you've just said, whether it's horticultural studies, arboriculture, even like farming. Like, yes, there's room for lab work and academia, but not 5 days a week. It's way smarter for you to kind of find the top 3-4 people, put all of that university money. Remember, it's $9 grand a year for 3 years. Trust me. I mean, I believe that there'll be a lot of like people that can create. I mean, and by the way, the crude version of it is all of these coaches online. So all of these coaches get teams of sometimes 3 up to about 21 people, just literally getting people into a funnel in order to attend the course. So if a prominent leader literally creates a university around themselves, it's very doable. But like you say, the guarantee has to be that you're getting access to the person. You're not selling them a BS course and then leaving them to go figure it out. They've got to come in your organization. They've got to touch real things, feel real things, 2 years worth of actual learning. So there's a guy he's running something called Mission U, and his version of that is where you do get guaranteed a job. That's something like $35,000 or something like that, but you're guaranteed a job at the end of it, and you get to work with the top sort of banks and startups. So he's got relationships with, say, your Ubers or the equivalent of your Ubers and all of that. And he then, fundamentally, people come into the course for free. They spend 2 years moving around the different big organizations, degree, and then at the end of it, they get work, and then he takes something like 2% of their income for a certain amount of time. But again, 2% of getting 70k a year, 40k a year, whatever. It's not like the money's discounted. It's just really interesting what happens, because universities take the money first with no promise. This guy's basically saying, I'm actually going to take the money after, and I'm giving you all the promise. And I think that's where I think academia and academics, if they're united, there could be a really interesting piece of disruption. And then I think that taking that to communities where maybe the individuals can't afford you yet, but we as social enterprises potentially can start to put, 400 or 500 quid together just to get you guys in house a little bit more. I think that there's something interesting there if we start to think differently.
I think there is a possibility. Also, I don't know if you've heard of the Free Black University. That's just, I don't think it's actually got any content up at the moment. But it's relatively new. They did a crowdfund. It's headed up by Mel's Owusu, and they want to put free resources and all that sort of stuff. So people are starting to think about new models. I think at the moment, from my understanding, it's only certain institutions that have it depends. If you want a degree, it's only institutions that are able to kind of give you that validation. So I've worked in institutions where they do the delivery, but the degree is actually awarded by
accredited somewhere else. Yeah, exactly.
So it depends on if that is important to the person or how that can be worked around. If you want a degree to be part of the process.
Yeah, as a teacher, I already know that game. Like making units work for you and transferring units and all of that. It's not as complex. You're right, though. There's only a few gatekeepers that will ratify something. But the good news is, wherever there's money, there's a solution. So the bigger question is there enough money to make
the solution?
Cool. You know what I mean? So anyway, I'm going to end talk there. I think for me, it's been very riveting. I think your story about being a free thinker who in part you were able to tell us the story that there is fear, there is anxiety, but you moved forward anyway. And then you've also been able to kind of highlight that, you're still figuring it out. And in your figuring it out, you found certain ands you've added to yourself, and you're trying to make yourself accessible to communities. So to finish, can you just repeat how people can get in touch with you and how to get in touch with you, and if there's any 2 or 3 things that you're maybe interested in from the community, maybe you've got a question for them, or maybe you want to recommend a book. So you get to kind of end the last sort of 30-40 seconds with your socials and any asks and any recommendations for books.
Okay. I think so. You can find me again, drmoniquecharles.com. So that's just Dr. Monique, Monique, Charles, as in Prince Charles.com. You can find me there, or you can just type my name into Google. If you just type Monique Charles Grime, I will be the first thing that comes up. So you can find me that way. My Instagram is the main one I use. So that is Neek81. So that's N for November, EAKE 81. You can find me there. What would I ask? What would I ask the community?
If you've got any kind of any kind of ask that, or maybe you want to recommend a book instead, like top 2-3 books that you think are amazing to read and learn from.
Books that are I'm just thinking. I mean, I've got like loads of books myself. I don't know. I think, okay, well, it depends. If you're interested in Black Britishness, I'll just go to the standard, one of the ones that came out in 2016, Blackness in Britain, Kahindi Andrews. So he knows, and Lisa Palmer. They edited it. And so there's different chapters about different aspects of Blackness in Britain, basically. So that's a good kind of generic one to start with. What else? I've got a chapter in that one as well. And then I'm just trying to think if there's anything else. If you're interested in music, just trying to think if there's any other ones. I think I'll just leave it at that one for now, I think, in terms of books. What I don't necessarily think I have a question for the community, but what I would like to say is sometimes there's value in what you do, even if you don't always know it. And what you have to say and your voice matters. Yeah. So I think those are kind of the things I'd like to kind of leave you with, because I think when I was doing the thesis or the PhD on grime and I was interviewing people, I was saying to them, you know, you made history, you changed the soundscape, what we're used to, like back in the 80s and 90s, mainstream didn't even know about a bass line. You know, you've shaped the British charts, and it would take a moment for them to realize what I'd said, because the mainstream narrative was telling them something else, basically you're worthless, or, you know, that kind of thing. Or I'd ask them, oh, did you teach yourself how to use that? And in that moment, they realize, hold on, I've taught myself how to use all, you know, these different pieces of technology, and I did this, and I didn't even realize I taught myself. So, you know, there is genius in you. But although there is genius in you, there are processes and time and things that you also need to learn to make the most of it in some cases. Especially if I speak from my experience, going through this, long game vision, and people getting snippets and then trying to run with those snippets, they'll only take you so far. So sometimes you need to take the time. You know, structures can be there for a reason if used properly and not abused, obviously. But yeah, what you have to offer, what you can bring to the table is a lot, but just take time, be patient with yourself, try and see if you can master it. You can still step out, but, you know, try and see if you can master it as much as possible in any given moment, and do it with love, integrity, and care.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay. Huge thank you to Dr. Monique Charles. Yeah, it's been an enjoyable exchange of thoughts. And yeah, like I think some of these learnings will be really, really useful to a lot of people. And I'm hoping for us to be able to continue to speak some more. For anyone who's following us, don't forget to you can see aspects of the full video if you can go to aspireforyou.co.uk. That's ASPIRE, the number 4, the letter u.co.uk/leading-communities-podcast. And you can follow us on A4U CIC. If you're interested in other things, especially pertaining to what we've spoken about around, say, bid writing and raising funds for your own social enterprises, and aspects of thinking strategically about how to make a difference with people like Monique Charles, then please get in touch with us through our socials, A4UCIC, or hello@aspireforyou.co.uk. Thank you very much and have a great day.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to keep up to date with all things leading communities. You can follow Aspire for You at A4UCIC. To follow That's All Media, search at That's All Media. You can also join us on Facebook at Leading Communities Podcast.